yang ving rong yang
Namaste, friends. Welcome to the Esoteric Cafe, round 2. I'm Waylon Belding, and
I'm James Foyle. Cheers and namaste.
namaste. I have water today. Cheers. So, it's been a great time in this earth these last few weeks, or at least the last week since we talked last.
A great time, yes. Why is that? Why is it so great?
Well, it looks like slowly this quarantine time is petering off, or at least people are starting to come out more. And
Yes.
the actual numbers are starting to clarify themselves.
And now we can go to actual cafes
And then we go to actual
rather
cafe.
than these virtual ones.
Yeah, but I'm sure the virtual habits will stay true for most people, and the opportunity for us to share these ancient teachings with them hopefully will still remain.
Yes. Yeah, it's it kind of promotes us to communicate more. But at the same time, like, I don't know, hope we're not getting too far away from nature. As the gates are opening back to nature, people might be stuck in some habits. Might have got a little bit too used to this internet thing.
It's true. Well, maybe that's why, like for me, I've been reluctant to get too open on the online world for a long time. And this time has kind of provoked me, pushed me a little bit. It's like, share what you know. Because I feel like there's a bit of a vacuum in the world space, what I can see on the YouTubes and on the social medias. There's a bit of a vacuum. It's very materialistic. Not a lot of people are talking along these lines. So there's a place for us, absolutely.
Yeah, the conversations have changed too, like with what people are talking about, like the search for truth is really going on quite a bit.
It's true. Well, we realize that what we've built our lives on, how easy it can be, the rug can be pulled out and we can be left on the ground with not really any idea of what the heck we're going to do with ourselves.
Yeah, and not even know. A lot of people are realizing how much they don't know about what's actually going on in the world either.
Yeah. Well, that's an ongoing thing that's been going for a long time. Whether they've seen
Yeah,
it.
it's kind of always been happening, and now we're kind of. I mean, the majority, like even my mother, and even the odd person who didn't question the social norms before, definitely wondering in new ways.
It's true. It's true. My mother as well has also gotten into the conspiracy theories a lot. Not that she's following them or believing them, but she's taking them in a way that she never did before. And
Yeah.
it's interesting. Some people, those mainstream people, they'll say it's not good, but I think it's good to take in all of the avenues and let the crucible of reality sift out what is true and what is not true.
Yeah, or at least hone our skills on being able to determine that.
Yeah, critical thinking. We're supposed to be trained by the Western system and strong in critical thinking, but it looks like that's not always the case.
Yeah.
So last time you said we had a few questions, and maybe you can bring them up. We can talk about them a little.
Yeah, one friend was watching our interview, and she suggested to clarify this idea of what I think I was probably talking about it more, this idea of darkness versus light, and the necessity of darkness versus light. And I think I came across as saying there's no necessity for darkness, and we just need to like be light and be in the light as much as possible. Actually, what I was really saying was that ancient wisdom, one of the hallmarks of ancient wisdom is that it's gone through, hundreds, if not thousands of years of refinement of being able to help us avoid suffering, right? So that I think that's one of the most important things to recognize about the ancient wisdom traditions, especially like the yogic traditions, that probably have deeper roots than most traditions out there. I mean, surely we were talking about before about how there was probably some great cataclysms in the past, and these yogis went to the mountains and preserved these ancient scriptures, by chanting them and memorizing them. And then that's like a thread to these ancient civilizations that most likely had not only lots of time to think about and refine wisdom, but also probably had like higher levels of technology than we can imagine, or that the mainstream will tell us they had.
It's true.
So
It's true. And along those lines of the ancient civilization, I love this topic very much. The predecessors, the ones that came before. It only makes sense that if you look at any of the archaeological evidence that's out there, and a lot of scientists will attest to this, more and more it's becoming mainstream, the idea that we've gone through catastrophic ends. Something like 10, 13,000 years ago or something like this was the last one. And completely wiped the whole earth clean, they say, or at least a large majority of it. And then people always ask me, well, then why did yoga start in India? But if you look at the highest mountain, it's in India. And if the waters rise and things go to garbage, you're going to go towards the highest point. It only makes sense that the luminaries of the previous age, the yogis, the ones who had all the most valuable knowledge, they went to the highest place. They went to the Himalayas. Yeah. And when waters kind of went back down and things calmed down, they just came down, and they happened to be in India.
Yeah, there's some interesting archaeological finds about those great cataclysms. I think you're right. There's something about 14 or 13 or whatever thousand years ago. It's hard to pin that one down. Obviously, that was the beginning of the last ice age, and it ended about 9,000 to 8,000 years ago, right? And then there seems to have been something in between then as well. Something maybe about 5,000 years ago, as far as the way civilizations shifted and kind of reset and stuff like that, But,
and if there was an advanced civilization and they had advanced techniques, I'm sure all of those techniques were lost, and the only things they could preserve would have been the lifestyle sciences, the things that they developed that were not material. Because when things are going bad and you have to flee and you have to move a lot, the material things, you're just going to let them go. They're not going to be that important to you. Things you're going to keep are going to be the things that you can carry with you all the time.
Yeah. In my research, the two, what seem to be probably the oldest texts are like as far as I can see, or the theories that I have that make the most sense are this Natya Shastra thing, which is the dramatic arts text, as strange as that may sound, and then this astronomy text, the Surya Siddhanta. And the Surya Siddhanta is actually where we get the most proof of the higher levels of technology as far as scriptures go that are in the mainstream, because it has all sorts of values, at least a dozen different values that would have required like technologically advanced instruments, that like to do the readings, to like know the distances to different stars, all the way from like to get such exact readings about different orbital values of the Earth and stuff like that. A lot of modern history about the advancements of science like goes back to like Newton and Copernicus and all those guys about great discoveries. But if you actually read the Surya Siddhanta, it actually demonstrates that like every single like major thing that Newton figured out about gravitation and all those theories, it was actually in the Surya Siddhanta.
True. And it's funny how even the Indians, they forgot about it. They forgot about what they had. They had it at one point and then they lost it. And
and I mean, again, like those values were written down according to like archaeoastronomy, at least. And this is, some people may be listening to this and thinking, oh yeah, maybe not, that there were these ancient people that had these advanced um, capacities to measure and understand these very advanced scientific mathematic concepts and astronomical concepts. But according to archaeoastronomy, which is the measurement, or which is basically looking at a text and looking at the different values of positions of stars and, you know, orbital values that are written down, like the angle of the Earth's obliquity, right? The Earth is rotating like this as it goes around the sun. It's not like a perfect, you know, parallel orbit. And like, so all these little values that are in there are basically, um, because they change over thousands of years, you know, because like the angles change over thousands of years, and because the stars actually move over thousands of years, because the precession of the equinox, which is where the sun is positioned in the stars during the equinox, changes, right? If you track all those and then you look at what's written in these books, specific dates start to show up. And what's really interesting is there's like, if you measure all the written down star positions in the Sirius Sedanta and you take all the orbital values, like the angle of the Earth and precession of the equinox stuff, it pinpoints that it was actually written down around 3000 BC. You know, like at least the last update of that text was at least that old. So what's really interesting about 3000 BC is it correlates with like some of the stories that are still preserved in India about, like, you know, Krishna being around 3000 BC, right? This is the tradition, and it's written down in some monuments and stuff in India, the 3000 BC type era, right? But actually, if you go to the Mayan calendar and everything, and you look at the stories about their stories about cataclysmic events, it actually correlates almost perfectly. About 3100 BC, according to the Mayans, as well as the Indians, corresponds to what the Mayans say was the end of the last age and the beginning of the new age. And what's really interesting is there's this story that correlates with the yugas in the Indian system as well, in the Mayan system, where they say about every 5,000 years or so, like the Mayans say this anyway, according to their calendar system, that around every 5,000 years, like a reset kind of happened. And during the last one, a big reset happened and civilization crashed, basically. You know, like, and what's really interesting is they talk about how like it's almost like a test of civilization. We go to these points where I guess you could say maybe technology advances to a certain point, and it's whether or not we pass the test of our technology destroying us or not. And according to this, you know, these very old writings from the Mayans system, the South American, you know, stuff that has been quite erased by the Catholics and everything that came there, right? But there's still these ones that are preserved that actually say that there's been four or like three or four or something like that of these big events where the reset happened, and and each of them failed, and they're saying maybe not the next one. But what's really interesting is we're at that next point right now.
Yeah.
You know, if you think about like how there's the 5,000 year cycle of the Mayans, you know, and that correlates with the Indian system where there's like 5 points on the Yuga cycle,
Right.
which has to do with the precession of the equinox, and it's almost like a pentagram, right? So like every time you get to this one point, it's the next test. You get to this one point, it's the next test, and here we are, like right at the peak of the next test. So
Yeah, and it's
it's like a
interesting.
game.
Well, yeah, in one sense, it is that. I mean, that's also why they always say that everything is a lila of God, right? It's a big lila. It's a play. It's a dance.
Yeah.
And why when you say the dramatic text is one of the old ones, it only makes sense that it's kind of a big play. But for us down here, the little microorganisms running around, it's a little bit of heavy. It's a heavy play. And it's interesting because the trajectory of our current culture has been, like we talked about last time, kind of on the heavy on the material side, and that kind of struggle between the material and the spiritual, or the modern knowledge versus the ancient knowledge is kind of imbalanced.
Yeah.
And it reminds me always, Mahatma Ji would always say that our modern world, our materialistic leg or our materialistic arm is very built up, very strong, and our spiritual arm is very feeble. So when it comes to the real problems that come, you know, you need to have both arms. You need to have a stable spiritual side and a stable material side to be able to withstand the tests and the tribulations.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's where the ancient wisdom comes in, right?
Yes. That's
Or not necessarily the ancient wisdom as much as like common sense.
yeah.
You know, to look at our failures of what we've done and use our common sense to see how we can keep in harmony and keep and sustain ourselves through all this chaos that's arising, especially at the moment, you know.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's cool. We survived the Cold War. Now it's the next one up is this viral war, apparently.
Yeah. And there's
Who knows?
never
Who knows
going.
if it's a biological weapon thing that we need to learn to deal with, or it's just actually like the Earth trying to kick us off, you know, saying you're destroying yourself.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely a marker. It's a point of, you know, you're pushing this a little too far this way. You know, check yourself or you're going to wreck yourself. You know, and we definitely do have to start to change our trajectory a little bit, because if we don't, it's only going to lead down worse and worse. And we've known for a while, like I've been reading things for a long time and listening to things, and people know, you know, environmental problems and viruses and plagues and pandemics, whatever. These are all the beginnings of the collapse of civilizations. And it happens in every single civilization that's happened before. It's not a new story for us. But it's just funny how maybe it's like the same in every civilization. Everybody's just enjoying on a big bus of so much hubris and so much enjoyment and pleasures and fun and hedonism that we totally are distracted away from this truth. And it's kind of sad because it's always the weak, the poor, the ones who are disadvantaged. They're the ones that end up suffering the most because of this distraction.
Yeah, it seems like they are, but a lot of the poor also are more resilient than
It's true.
the people who are dependent on the material things too, right?
True. You can see that in the way that this virus has caused reactions in the different countries. Like countries like India, they seem to be handling it much, like their systems seem to be stronger, or they have a different thing or whatever. But the most affluent countries are the ones that are the ones that are having the most trouble.
Yeah, that's what I find fascinating is there seems to be more people dying from the virus, and in these places where we don't have I don't know, maybe there is more people dying, maybe there isn't. There seems to be a lot of misinformation, so it's hard to tell, but
It's hard to tell.
you know.
It is hard to tell, and it only makes sense because, you know, I know for you, this is a good debate between you and me, between the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness. You know, is it the age of darkness, or are we out of the age of darkness? And sometimes it feels like we're out of it, and then sometimes it feels like we're not out of it, because the age of darkness is always described as a time of what was it? I remember I was listening to Kishore's recent thing on the Bhagavatam, and he was talking about the Dharma bull. If you remember the Bhagavatam, the Dharma bull has 4 legs in the golden age: truth, austerity, you know, cleanliness. Everything is good. And in this age, he only has 1 leg left, which is truth. And it's the age of impersonation, where people who have the most power and the greatest platform and the, you know, the most prestige are the ones that are the total impersonators.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. So that's one of the verifications.
They're also the ones at the wheel, you know, deciding whether or not their decisions are actually the bigger decisions of whether or not our civilization collapses or not, you know.
Yeah. But then again, maybe the mistake that human beings have been making all this time is relying too much on the ones at the wheel and forgetting that actually each one of us has a wheel in front of us.
Yeah.
Right. And that wheel is the one we have to take control of and snap out of the haze we're in and take control of it, take control of our lives, take control of every single breath in every single moment, and realize that no matter what those ones choose, no matter which direction it's putting us, we have to be the ones responsible for what happens to us.
That requires growing up and not depending on them, you know.
True.
But I think 99% of the population is still going to depend upon their government, no
Oh, yeah.
matter what happens.
You're right. You're right. Absolutely. And so we hope that the government is enlightened. We hope that there are enlightened kings taking the advices of the philosophers and the great luminaries.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
A lot of them, I think, a lot of them feel that their lives are a bit of a dream or something, things are, and people are kind of dispensable beneath them. That's what it feels like. But who knows? Maybe they have a lot more. Maybe they're a lot more aware of the fact that everyone below them actually has a heart and feelings. I just hope that that's more true. But I feel that a lot of the teachings that they have, kind of, again, going back into our last conversation, seems like a lot of their teachings seem to be mistranslations of these Vedic scriptures, right?
Mhm.
Of these ancient scriptures that were, again, they were meant to help us out and avoid suffering, right? They have insight, and if they're being used and interpreted in any other way, that's actually not giving credit to those things or not interpreting them properly, right? If somehow any of their interpretations of the wisdom that they're trying to utilize in their belief systems and their societies and their secret kind of gatherings, if the wisdom they're utilizing validates the suffering of others, then I don't know, that might be what leads to societal collapse, right?
It's true. It's true. And that goes back to your friend with her question, is that you can't avoid pain. It's true. No matter what, the pain is going to be there.
Yeah.
But how we handle that pain or what we make of it, how we can transform it, that's where the spirituality comes in. That's where the ancient wisdoms come in. That's the difference between the material person and the non-material person. And the material person in this time, they're going to try to buy things to try and fill their house to prevent the virus from coming in. And the spiritual person is going to realize that, oh, this is a great opportunity to sit and meditate, and then to rebuild myself up and to make myself strong through exposing myself and slowly, getting the station of health, cleansing
Yeah.
temple of the body, purifying and focusing the mind so that the suffering won't bug us, it won't bother us.
Yeah. The essence of these yoga traditions, of this ancient wisdom, is to find it within and not require without. And I think one of the best examples of this, I mean, you're a great example of this, but also like someone like Wim Hof and what he's proven and what he's proving to the world right now is the capacity to face extreme austerity and still remain warm, remain in contact with light. And I really like this one observation about him, like when he I think, I don't know how many years ago it's been now, maybe 5 years or something, when he broke the kind of long distance, like underwater breath holding uh ice water kind of record or whatever it was. I think it was like 70 meters or something. He went under the water in under the ice, right, and came up later. He has this he reports on his experience, and basically, it was almost 10 minutes or something like that. He was holding his breath, right, and swimming and trying to find this hold, where basically at one point his eyeballs or his retinas froze or something, and he couldn't see where he was going. And the average person, what would they do? They would panic, right? They would freak out, and apparently because he couldn't see, he passed the hole where he was supposed to come up out of the ice, right? And then somehow because he still could just barely make out that there wasn't any light and that the light was back there instead, he somehow found his way back, and like the person there ended up pulling him out of the water or whatever, just in time or something like that. But what's really amazing about about the story is how he talks about his experience of not one moment of panic, and the whole time he was totally chilled out and relaxed, you know. And he said he was just in the light, like he was just experiencing this light and this warmth the whole time. And he established that through his practices and the wisdom traditions that he's been following since a young age, you know, like the yoga and the breathing techniques and everything. And I think it's just a great example of what we can do, you know, what the potential is.
Yeah, I remember when I went to my friend's wedding in Bali, you remember? And I told you that I did the underwater testing of holding the breath on the water as long as you can, the dead man's float. And the only obstacle is the mental obstacle.
Yeah.
Really, truly the only obstacle. The body is capable of doing so many things. And it's just a matter of relaxing, letting everything come down, letting everything calm down. And then you can go way beyond your limitations, way, way, way beyond your limitations. And so,
Trusting
yeah,
trusting the body to do what it needs to do in those moments, right?
yeah.
And we don't trust usually. Most of us just like depend upon things outside of us to save us rather than, you know, learning how to get ourselves to save us, you know, and unlocking those potentials of, you know, being able to use your thoughts to ignite the flame inside of you or the light or the bliss inside of you, right?
And a lot of the times, sometimes these doubts come because we haven't actually undergone the correct training. It always reminds me of one of my favorite aspects of the Yoga Sutra, and the tapas, right? The first words that Lord Brahma heard from the Supreme Personality when he's sitting there looking at the emptiness, and he doesn't know what he's supposed to do, what he's supposed to create, what he's supposed to do. And then he hears the words tapas, tapas. And then he has to create the tapas to do. And as a simple yoga teacher, helping people, and especially my style is very tapas. It's enduring. Tapas means kind of, we talked about it last time, it means burning heat inside, but it also means undergoing some austerity, undergoing some trouble, some challenge. It's,
Yeah.
it's actually undergoing a little bit of stress, but it's deliberate stress. It's not necessarily stress from your family or from your work or whatever. It's your practice time. You're doing something which is beyond your current capacity. And the point of that is ultimately to put yourself in a position where you can begin to strengthen yourself, like the way a diamond is made, right? Like some of the most purest diamonds that are made on the earth are the ones from the meteors, come from the earth, come from the space, hit the ground, and then they always find a whole bunch of diamonds in the impact zone,
Yeah.
because that's where the carbon is smashed together.
Yeah.
And so, in
I
that,
don't want to be hit by a meteor to get enlightened.
well, that's maybe what the next catastrophe will be. Who knows? You know.
Maybe.
But in a sense, it is like something from the heavens has to come and dawn upon us to transform us from this piece of coal, from this carbon, into a beautiful diamond, right? Something that's
Yeah.
perfect in every facet.
Yeah. Brahma, I think the story about Brahma, you know, poking his head out of the lotus, right? As
Yeah.
he's growing from Vishnu's navel. You say he saw the darkness and it just needs, it's like, oh, what do I create, right?
What do I do?
And
Who am I?
it
What is this?
yeah, where am I? What's going on? Like this is like it's the complete unknown, and that itself is stressful. That's the greatest spiritual stress. That's a really interesting insight to actually point that out because you know the qualm of being a sentient being has a lot to do with the fact that we need distraction from the fact that we don't know what the hell we're doing or where we're going, right? That we can't verify anything. And sometimes we need like this chaos around us to distract us from going within or just, you know, facing the ultimate truth of reality of existence. And what's, you know, what does Brahma do? He does the tapas, right? He faces the stress and then he realizes basically that he can deal with anything,
Yeah.
that all the answers he's been searching for are kind of within or something, right? And searching for the answer without is almost meaningless. It's not there, you know.
See, once he does his tapas and remembers his japas, his repetition of the holy name, he remembers he remembers all those things, then suddenly everything. That's our condition. That's each and every one of us. We're all Brahmas. We're all creators of our own
Yeah.
life, and we're all put with a situation where, what the heck am I supposed to do with my life? A lot of people, they don't have the direction. They don't really know. They don't have the guidance. I was very lucky in my life. I got a lot of guidance, a lot of direction, and I was able to find what I really love. But I know there's a lot of people who are in their life and they feel lost, and they're just going through the motions, distracting themselves, like you said.
Yeah, distract.
Yeah, distracting themselves. But
This actually, you know, what's interesting, this actually makes me think about um, the leadership, right? That is just fully distracted. When you have all this money and all this power, you fill your life with so much distraction. It's just like you can't like I don't think people can resist the temptation almost, you know. Maybe there is the odd enlightened leader out there, but generally that's what's so dangerous about civilization is that the leadership ends up being the most distracted and needing more intense stimulus, you know, and sometimes going and needing horrific stimulus even to like keep distracted. And you know what is it that we're distracting ourselves from? It's every single one of us is that Brahma, you know, who's you know opening up to the universe of the unknown. And these are the people that are kind of most afraid of the darkness in a certain sense, right? And the most distracted. And that's we should have some compassion for that because we don't know what it's like to be them. But at the same time, like those people need need this type of wisdom the most almost because they're the most likely to not do it, right? To not be free from the distraction and not find the answer within, right? Something like this. Anyway,
well, yeah, that reminds me again of Mahatma Ji's teachings. And he would always tell me stories because a lot of the ancient Indian stories, they're talking about like a king who comes to a yogi or gets wisdom from a child. And they're always the seekers in those old stories when they're talking about the enlightened ages. The
yeah,
philosopher king is always the seeking, looking like he realizes that he's got the hardest job of all. He's the one that really has to depend on the ones who sought the wisdom. And the ones who seek the wisdom, the ones who seek the truth, they're always the ones that are almost the furthest away from the seekers of power. Because, usually those who want to find inner peace, they don't go anywhere near authority or positions of authority. They're like,
yeah,
you don't want to have power. I want to go away from this. I want to renounce this life. I want to go in the opposite direction.
yeah,
So it's almost as if the greatest renunciate needs to go in with the greatest corrupted to try and help each other to find a middle path.
yeah. They need to. Yeah, I mean the renunciate runs away because they know that they're just going to get distracted. The king's going to distract them or something. And I have an interesting story about that where I met um, this really great astrologer guy in India, this younger guy, and his grandfather was one of the most sought out, if not the most sought out during the last kind of 100 years, astrologer in India from the kings and queens and stuff of the land, but also like you know the kings and queens of Europe and stuff like that were like coming to him and getting advice from him and stuff like that. And he has a story about how one day Reagan's guys, like these guys dressed in black, showed up in his at his house in India, you know, to try to get him to like help them, you know, and he just like said no, I can't, you know, this type of thing. So like the most powerful kind of country in the world, the leader came to get this guy and he's just like no. And that's one of the reasons why he was such a great astrologer, you know, is because he was able to like not be distracted by that stuff, you know.
Yeah. Every path is fraught with the option of going into distraction or going further away from what you know is the highest goal. And I think probably this is a universal principle. Every single person has had opportunities in their life where they could have chosen, a more pure option, but they chose a more comfortable option or an option that has more security.
Or more fulfillment of the desires that they strongly had, you know.
Their desires, material desires. it only makes sense because our own individual mind is going through so many variations, and then if the opportunity comes at a particular time when you're feeling weak or when things are going wrong, it's very easy to jump on board. Yeah, very easy to
Yeah.
jump on board. Yeah, that's interesting. Ronald Reagan, eh? He's also the one that did the Star Wars, and he's the one that talked about unifying against an alien force or an alien threat.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. He did it on the international day. That was the starting of the International Day of Peace or something like that, and it was like 30, almost 40 years ago. He went in front of the United Nations and made this big speech on like, imagine there was an alien threat, what we would do. And I've always wondered if they're ever going to try to like pull that one off,
Well,
like try to bring people together or something based on a fake alien invasion or something.
well, it's interesting that even the Pentagon a while ago released all this new not alien, but like UFO data. And that was like during this pandemic, and like it wasn't even a big story compared to what was going on. And
Yeah, nobody believes it. Even if you like did this huge WikiLeaks thing and you published it on CNN, people would still question it.
well, I've had my own experience, and I talked about it on the other podcast, and where I had a direct experience of an unknown object really close with a whole bunch of phenomenal and unbelievable things happening. But so for me, I've always been open to these ideas because of that experience. Once you have the experience and your mind is open to it, they're not so far-fetched. And I don't know where the truth lies with it, but I definitely know that our perception of reality is limited compared to what's there. And I feel like nowadays we hold our science as if it's so great and it can clarify everything for us and that it has all the answers, and it's almost a fanatical religious belief, just like before when people were following religions fanatically. And it's not that science is bad, it's that we don't even have the full cutting edge of where science is going. And even the scientists themselves, they're so detached from what the other one's doing. They don't know what the whole breadth of science is. Nobody really knows what that is.
You're talking about the official kind of universal university view on science, like where there's no forbidden archaeology. No one will talk about like ancient civilizations, and
Right.
no one will talk about the truth of the possibility of aliens. I mean, they'll discuss it as like a potential, but they'll never like start showing video footage or something like that in a university that demonstrates, you know, things like free energy technology or anti-gravity, or whether or not these things exist. It's almost like we're not allowed to say it's true,
There's,
otherwise we're not going to get our degree.
there's so many stories about the free energy thing. It's amazing, man. Talking about the free
Yeah,
energy.
I've been more and more willing to accept it, and you know and I think there's something to it. I think there really is.
I have one friend who's really into it. He's really, really into it. He's actually compiling a group of people to try and do it. And yeah, I think you met that guy a long time ago who he had a free energy kind of device.
Yeah, I went to go see John Hutchinson
John
because
Hutchison.
he was
There's a
making these
famous guy.
crystal cells.
He's like a '90s meme, isn't he? Kind of like a.
Yeah, pretty much. He had a lot of viral videos going around back in the 90s and early 2000. But so I went to go seek him out one day because he lived in New Westminster, which was only you know like less than like 30 kilometers away. So I just caught a bus to like go find him because I found like his mailing address online. And it's funny because I showed up at the exact moment when this guy flew in from Toronto who was gonna like start a business with him making what they called um, free energy crystal cells, basically flashlights. They wanted to make these flashlights based on like these crystal cells that John was had invented basically. that were able to produce a very, very minimal constant, you know, voltage basically out of just thin air, basically using what's called the Casimir effect, and how like when you align certain um, types of crystals or something like that, or like crystal dust in a certain way, it makes them actually pick up on this very, very subtle fluctuation of the 0 point field or something like that, right? And actually produce like this very small electric charge, just enough to light a little LED. So they were going to manufacture uh, these little flashlights basically just to like give people proof to be able to put in people's hands. That was what, like 15 years ago or something like that. The flashlight never saw the light of day, you know, right? But what I was thinking is that, and actually a buddy of mine kind of pointed this out, that he probably thought I was a spy because I showed up right when this guy flew in from Toronto, and I wanted to say, hey, I knocked on his door like, "Hey, how's it going, John? I wanted to meet you. You know, I wanted to see some proof of this stuff that you have these crystal cells." And he's like, "Oh, yeah." And basically, he told me nothing. He didn't show me that, but he showed me all this other stuff, and he had this cool, crazy, decked out apartment where he had to have like he had to have these big huge chains hanging from the ceiling to support the floor so it didn't cave in because he had all this retired Navy equipment lining all the walls. It looked like, you know, a sci-fi movie basically. And but the one thing he did tell me is that, you know, in these old Navy equipment, they have some of these what they're calling capacitors, but they're not actually capacitors. They're actually little cells that produce a constant voltage. He said they were using this crystal cell technology for like at least 30, 40 years in, you know, the secret army kind of devices and stuff like that to keep their things working. And he said, yeah, I've had some of these things that they've just been giving a constant voltage for almost 20 years now, you know, just sitting in this equipment back there. And basically what he was doing was he was mimicking those technologies, and he found how to do it or something like that. You know, that's the story. Who knows? He
Yeah.
never gave me any proof, probably because he thought I was a spy, you know, but
Or he didn't, or he had it, or he didn't have it. Who knows? Who knows?
maybe, maybe not. And maybe, yeah, he was a joker. You know, one of the things that I noticed about him that I was surprised about is he was a comedian. He liked to trick people a bit. One example is like someone phoned like his phone while I was there, and he's like, Pentagon level 7, you know, as a joke to, because I think that's how he answers the phone all the time because he likes tricking people. So maybe his whole career is built on his need for humor or something, you know.
Tomfoolery. Yeah.
Who knows?
Thing. But
But
the,
I'm willing to believe it.
of course, of course. I mean, it makes sense. Like it feels right somehow inside that there is some kind of technology that's naturally always there. We just have to harness it.
Just like our bodies, right? We have all this technology. You just gotta like, but the thing is, as soon as we harness it, then we can't be controlled anymore. You know, whether that be the inner technology or the outer technology, and that's the big thing, right? That's why we would be misinformed about it. That's why it would be hidden because rich people wouldn't be as rich anymore. I don't know. I think that's the end of civilization if that keeps up.
Yeah, it would be. At least we hope so, because if that keeps up, then it just leads to tyranny, and it leads to kind of indentured servitude for the
Yeah,
majority of people.
yeah.
So, that's when you talked about Krishna before. That's Krishna came, he grew up, and when he reached a certain point, he had to kill Kams, his uncle, who was like a dictator, and just making slaves and being a horrible, horrible, horrible leader. That was one of his purposes. So that's kind of
But again, we have to see the innocence in these people and how they're the most distracted, you know, and this plays into the oldest stories in the Vedas about about like I like the story of Parashara, you know, the Maharishi, the guy who wrote and dictated all of the astrology that we know. The origin of all the astrology comes from Parashara, Hora Shastra, and the story about Parashara is that his father was killed, by these demons, the Rakshasas. And the story about the Rakshasas is they used to be kings, right? They used to be human beings. And then they just like found no pleasure in all their abundance anymore, and they just turned to more and more horrific things to stimulate their senses more and more, right? And eventually they started to drink blood, human blood, and become cannibals and stuff like that, according to these stories. And the idea is that Parashara, because he was so determined to kill them because they killed his father, he started to kill them all. He found a way, he found his yogic powers and started to kill them all. And then he was about to like kill the last one. This is how the story goes, right? And then like the voice of God or something like that. I can't remember who the character is that comes in. Maybe Brahma or something. I'm not sure. Says, "Don't stop. Killing them is not the answer." And this is what starts Parashara's kind of direction towards astrology, I guess you could say, because astrology is meant to help us find remedy for these conflicts that we have between planets,
Right.
and find unity again, to come back together as one, because those demons are projections of ourselves, and if we're killing them, what are we really doing, right? Are we really helping the universe? Are we really helping the world? And the story is that we're not. And what I can do to make this story more interesting actually is to add a story from the Natya Shastra, which talks about how by trying to kill the demons, basically, and this is how the story goes. Basically, Indra comes along, and he's he sees that the demons that are on stage are causing havoc. They're like freezing the actors, and they're stopping the play from continuing, and everyone wants to see the play, but the play is stopped, and all the gods are like, what's going on? And they figure out it's these demons stopping it, right? And because the demons don't want to see themselves get killed on stage, they hate the mimicry of that, right?
Right.
So Indra comes along and is like, well, we need the performance to continue, we can't stop it. So what he does is he takes this big jara, as it's called, and it's basically the gada that Krishna holds, or like the danda, the stick of like that kills the demons, whatever you want to call it. And he starts smashing them all to a pulp, as it said,
Yeah.
killing all the demons that are visible on the stage, right?
Mm.
But the idea is that in that story, as it's told, some of the demons run off and hide, right? Because they're being threatened, because we're trying to kill them, right? And as they hide, they're not gone. They're still there. And the story again picks up. So all the demons are gone. It just killed all the ones that are on stage. And then the play starts again, and then all of a sudden, like some of the actors freeze again or something. I can't remember exactly what it is, but essentially what it says is the actors are still feeling terror, right? The actors are still subject to terror. And then it's found out that there's these demons hiding, and there's nothing we can do to stop them from creating the terror, because they're hidden and they're kind of powerful and protected in their forts, and they're hiding out there, right? And so the idea is that Brahma comes along and says, well, okay, here's the deal. If we want to deal with these hidden demons, what we have to do is build the playhouse properly. We have to start from the beginning and realize that we didn't have the proper foundations. We didn't set the four pillars, and this and that, whatever the metaphor you want to say is, but it's a metaphor for yogic discipline,
Yes.
yogic wisdom, to have a healthy lifestyle, and not kill the demons on the way as we're developing, but basically to deal with our own inner demons first. And then once we have achieved what's called like a saman state, a state of bliss through our practices, through dealing with our own demons, then the play can start again, and then we can avoid having to kill the demons, because we're ready. We're coming from a place of bliss, basically. And I hope this makes sense, but this is how the story goes. And from there, basically, Brahma's recommendation is to deal with these hidden demons is to first find bliss and use summon energy to deal with them and not destroy them, to realize that they're just, a shadow or a projection, and that the way in which we avoid the demons from running and hiding, and to actually transform them and get them to dance with us on stage, right? To get the demons to dance to the same beat, that we can all enjoy, is to befriend them and ask them, please stop hurting people, or, stop doing this, stop creating so much terror, because you're creating so much terror and we just want to have a fun time,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and what's most interesting is that this is where the ancient wisdom is told in these stories, and how to use it. And then from establishing those pillars and finding bliss within, the next thing that Brahma says, or not the Brahma doesn't say this, or does he? I can't remember how it goes, but either way, this is where the four remedies are introduced, which is one of the most lost and most important yogic teachings, in my opinion. And the four remedies are to, in any situation when there's something wrong out there, any demons, any dark night of the soul, any stress it's dealing with, you ask the universe, please, I don't want this to happen. You use sweet energy with as much joy and as much ecstasy as you can generate. You try your best, right, to ask nicely for it to stop. You approach them with a non-threatening way at all. If that doesn't work, right, then you say you've tried your best and you offer an alternative means. This is the second remedy, right? You offer like a gift, or you offer a reward, or you offer an intelligent alternative, or you offer the wisdom that says, what you're doing isn't actually going to provide you the true happiness you want, right? Explaining to the child, for instance, why it's good to do this and not this. And then if that doesn't work, you move on to the third one, which is the fire. And these are the tools in Vishnu's hand, right? The first one is the conch, which is supposed to be a sweet sound that's commanding and gets what it wants. And then the second one is the pushpa, which is the offering. So he makes the offering, which is the intelligence or the gift, right? And the third one is the fire. It's the chakra fire.
Sudarshan.
Sudarshan chakra, yeah. It's the fire of disagreement, of saying, it's the fire of Rudra, of Shiva, like saying, no, this is not right. We will not put up with this. And this is the threat. This is like the conditions. It's like, what you're doing is not right. It needs to stop. And hopefully we're the master of this instrument, and we have compassion as we say that. We don't want to threaten them, but it's gotten to this stage, right? So we, as Shiva cries that little tear and it drops to the earth, and creates the Rudraksha seed, he also has his eyes are also angry. So he's balancing his anger with his sorrow to the fact that he has to destroy something. He's about to have to destroy something if they don't listen to the threat of disagreement, right?
Yeah.
But if that doesn't work, if Shiva's power isn't mastered and it isn't effective, and it doesn't convince that person to live in harmony, then comes the danda.
Yeah.
Now Indra can go on stage and destroy all the demons, because we tried our best, and we know where they're hiding because we just became friends with them. So there's not much we can do, not much they can do anymore. So anyway, that's how we deal with the darkness according to these things, right?
Yeah, right. It's interesting. You were talking about earlier about the Rakshasas and the blood. And then there was a news story that they just released a whole bunch of science. This just like happened recently. They said that drinking of the blood, especially young blood, can increase the lifespan of rats by like 50%.
That's, I don't know, should we edit that out of this conversation? I don't think that's good news.
No, I don't. It's not good news at all. But it's interesting that it comes out now with all these things. And so,
what is this? Is this in like mainstream news? Is that what they're doing?
Mainstream news thing. It's not. I've seen it in a few different things. But it's interesting always that like these stories of these people, this is old. It's not a new thing. It's very old. These ideas.
It's logical.
Yeah, and the ideas of the vampire and all these things, they're not new ideas. And it's just because you're talking about the cycle, right? The four offerings, the cycle. And it's just
Yeah.
interesting how everything is a continuous fractal of itself, is that these catastrophes are going to come again. And we have to, all of us, strengthen ourselves more and more. We have to all strengthen ourselves more and more.
Yeah, I mean, the ultimate thing is that that type of science has some truth to it, but not ultimate truth because of the fact that what are we doing to ourselves, by even believing that it's somehow healthy or actually somehow enlivening us
Yeah,
to do such a horrific thing,
true.
you know?
It's true.
Because it's not, I mean, that's just, again, that's the physical, it's going out there. How, like, what's that doing to your spirit? Is that really, like, do you actually believe that that's going to heal your spirit? Like, do you not believe in a soul? And maybe that's what the idea is. You don't believe in a soul.
Well, some people, you know, they make the choices for health and longevity, but they don't actually think about like at what cost, right? Of course, we can live a long time if we do certain things. Of course,
Anything, yeah. You can enslave a whole bunch of people and make them do whatever you need to maintain your health. You know, there's all sorts of ways of manipulating your own longevity and happiness. You know, relying on outside things.
but the same
So
problem still remains. Like, what are you going to do with all that time? Like, if you become immortal, what are you going to do? Like, what's your life going to be? How
it's
good is
not
it?
immortal. This vampire stuff is not like that, man. People don't become immortal. They just become addicted to some weird some weird idea, and not actually have generated any capacity to be independent, you know,
It's true.
and unlock the potential that every human being has for, what Wim Hof is proving, this ultimate comfort and light. Like, just think about what his experience is with death, with his thought of dying. He knows he's going somewhere beautiful after he dies. There's no doubt in his mind. He's dedicated all his time and energy to helping people and practicing these things, and he's in the light, completely.
I feel the same
So
way. I feel like I know exactly what's going to happen. I'm not scared for what's to come.
yeah,
And all of us have had some experience at one time that we can hold on to. We just need to simplify our mind a little bit and just remember that the absolute, or like the world around us, sometimes it looks at our own individual things not so nicely. Like if someone has a nice dream and they talk about it. And then it's like recently I went to Padma and I was telling her about my dream when I was a kid. I had a dream every night for the first 5 years of my life. There was this beautifully friendly giant with me. We were sitting in a vast area, empty area, just me and him, his house. And for like 5 years, I had the same dream. And there was always this entrance to a forest. And you could walk around it, but when you looked in, there was no end. And he always told me, if you're going to have to go into this forest one day, but when you go into this forest, you're never, ever going to see me again. And so I was telling Padma this, and one day I went through into the forest when I felt like I was ready to say goodbye to this friendly giant. And when I went into there, and then I never had that dream again. And then Padma came to me and she said, this is a dream. It's not real. And I said, well, just because it's a dream, it doesn't mean it's not real. If you have the experience, if you have the memory, if it has an effect on you, no matter what it is, a flight of imagination, a dream, a simple thought, a hallucination, if it has some value for you and it does something to change you, to shift you, then it is real and it has some power to it. And if you just boil down your life experience down to this most mundane and the most material things, then it's total suffering, this life. But if you keep up the idea, not just the imagination, but the playfulness of everything, and you understand that that's there, like when you hear the stories of Krishna, how he brings his whole world into this world, like they say he walked on this earth, and there's these fantastical things happening all the time. And some people believe that that's just because at that time he was here and he brought that whole world here with him. And it's not just a metaphor, but it's actually something that happened. And no matter how you look at it, whether you look at it in the most mundane way or the most fantastical way, if it has some value for you, if it really shifts you and it gives you some sense of contentment, and it brings you closer to that nityanand, that eternal happiness, that eternal bliss, that's the important part.
Yeah.
All these things can be tools for your meditation. They can be tools for your practice. This is why the tantrikas and the Buddhists and all these things, there's some tantric Buddhists and stuff, they go very far into visualizing, whether it be a perfect yantra or all of your masters in front of you, looking at you, and you're offering your head, you're offering your ego, you're offering everything. Whether it be that or the most simplest meditation on your breath, if it brings you a shift, then it's very powerful. And it will help you more than most things will.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the potentials of what we can access through just these practices, you know. I think what I hear when you tell this story is this idea of how much potential we have within ourselves to experience the most magnificent things. You know, like the greatest dreams you could ever dream are, what are they built of? They're built of just imagery and emotions. You know, imagine what it's like to be in control, absolute master of your own emotions, to be able to trigger that sense of like what the ultimate hero feels like as he's marveled at, right? To be able to generate all these things and to be able to have such a strong capacity to visualize anything, you know, and not depend on the outer world, and to bring that energy to what we could call mundane experience. Now that is what these people that are so distracted may never get to taste in their entire life, you know. And what does this mean as far as spiritual energy goes and where we're headed after this life, you know? And it means that we're in control of where we're going, right? Of our spirit and our direction. It really does. If you think about what that means to be in control in this body and not depend on this physical world for what dreams we want to experience, right? What does that mean after this body leaves? You know, those people that are dependent on all this stuff for their longevity, for their happiness and stuff like that, they are relying on this physical body. What is it like when they get to that edge of their death and then they pass over it? Imagine what it's like on that other side. They're going to be suffocating and struggling just for that next birth, you know, so that they can attach to what all they can, you know, in this world, so that they can actually have some sort of bliss. But their bliss is dependent on that, and they're not able to find the light. You know, like Wim Hof in the darkness and in the cold, he's in the light, right? He's there all the time. He can access it with a thought. You know, if you're dependent on these, if you're so distracted, how are you able to connect with that? You know?
It's interesting how we're getting into almost like the Tibetan Book of the Dead kind of
Yeah.
kind of
Well, it kind of is, yeah.
yeah, with the bardo, and then like the ones who are very attached to the material things, yeah, you're right, when the last breath comes, they wander as a disembodied spirit through the material world for a while, and if they don't find their way out, then they just get recycled back into it.
Yeah.
And they always say that in those
Poke their head out again into the darkness and,
yeah,
you know, just like freak out because they don't know where they are, where they're going. They haven't found it within, you know.
yeah, and then like when the time comes to make the last breath, and the scriptures talk about this a lot, that moment of the last breath is actually one of the most important moments you'll ever have, because in that moment you can liberate yourself. You can actually be like a drop of water into the ocean of bliss. You can actually transcend, and you can find your way back to God, basically.
Well, here's the thing. Now you're crossing the boundary into faith, right? We're saying things that may or may not be true, but what I'll say about that,
It's true. It's true. It's true.
that it
Things
makes
that have been written. So I'm just repeating
it
what.
make it makes total sense as far as reflecting on our journey as a sentient being, you know, and where we go and what happens before and after death, and if there is or isn't, you know, it's nobody knows that for sure. But if you think you know, it's just as bad as if you think you don't know,
It's true.
right? And the fact is that there is something that we all share, and how we're all just one and we're all connected to this light. And unless we realize we're that oneness, unless we connect with that oneness, that's where the bliss is, when you realize you are the oneness, right? When you're destroying your fellow human being, when you're causing suffering to them, that is the separation that is not connected to that spiritual essence,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Something along those lines.
Yeah. Well,
Anyway, it just makes sense to me. I think it's a good philosophy.
it makes sense. If there's division inside, you're going to cause division outside. It only makes sense.
Yeah,
It's all a perfect mirror of the world is a perfect mirror of itself, inside and outside.
it's a
And
miracle. You know,
it's a
a lot of
mirror.
this idea about like the infinite bliss and stuff like that seems like, you know, like it's too miraculous, too impossible to some people, right? But open your eyes if you have a hard time seeing the miracle, because it's all around us. Once you really see green for green and can taste the bliss of the different colors, just the visual spectrum itself, you know, let alone the bliss of like every touch, you know, as the sensation of every taste, you know, the experience of every smell, all this stuff is bliss, you know. It's a miracle.
It's the simplest thing, and it eludes us because we've become so complicated. We've overcomplicated the situation to the nth degree.
And overcomplicated and separated,
And
because
so,
now we're most people are watching this through their iPhone at the moment, you know.
yeah, it's true. But you're right
If
though.
that makes
If we really simplify our mind and we just recognize how amazing it is to wake up in the morning, though that first time when your consciousness enters back from sleep, and then you know every experience, even if you feel miserable. I remember when I was suffering from malaria in India, I got to the point where I was so sick and I was suffering so much that I was just happy to have any experience. And I was just happy, even if it was a painful experience, I was grateful that I could have something. I was like, how amazing is it even to have pain? Even to be feeling like I was going to die, at least that feeling of, it's not nothingness, it's something. That in itself is something tremendous.
quite the reminder. This is where the refinement of the yogic wisdom comes in, is to realize we don't need to suffer like that. You didn't need to get malaria to realize that everything is a miracle, right? It's just practicing every day to understand that it's a miracle, or whatever it is that connects us with those feelings that allow us to experience things in this beautiful way. You know, if you had that, you wouldn't have got malaria, I bet, you know.
Maybe,
If you if you
maybe.
had had a practice that kept you connected. Maybe not, but if you look at the patterns of humanity, right? Of being human, generally it's people who are super humble and do appreciate the smallest thing already, right? That are like somehow the most resilient and the most healthy and the least likely to get sick. If you really look at the patterns of what and who gets sick and who suffers, it's usually that the case, you know.
Yeah.
I really think that's a scientifically valid thing that's not so easy to prove, but I think that's one of the highest truths, you know.
You should endeavor to prove it, and then you can make it scientific fact.
I will. I'm on top of it. No, I think the proof is just paying attention to the people who are experiencing it on a daily basis.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. I can
look,
definitely say since that realization, I haven't gotten sick very much. That's for true. That's for certain.
yeah,
Yeah. That's for true.
it's tricky. It's not easy being human, perfecting ourselves.
Yeah, it's true. But I mean, this eventually, there's going to be some people that listen to that and they'll say, well, what about the people that were born with sickness? What about those people?
Of course, of course.
Yeah. And
But
this is where the endless arguments of karma and reincarnation are brought up. Whether
yeah,
we bring in, whether we come into this life with a bunch of experiences from the last life,
come
repercussions.
on, you got to tell me that you don't know in your own experience of life itself that somehow there's this feeling in your heart, this conviction of surrender to things, of like appreciation and gratitude that is what keeps us the most protected and the most healthy, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
See, this is what I mean. This is what I'm talking about. It's not about the argument of like all those people who suffer. I mean, yeah, I mean, children are born in horrific situations sometimes, but what happens to us when we're awake enough and aware enough, not a child, to realize this wisdom, right? This idea of this gratitude and this um
Well, this
whatever this is.
this is also a misinterpretation of that, because what I was going to get to is that those people that are born with those suffering, those ones are bringing in some valuable lessons that they can use to help. Those ones are bringing in some experiences that will actually bring them closer and closer to a higher state. And
Yeah.
it's actually our sufferings and our austerities, are the troubles that we go through that actually, I think Rumi, he had a beautiful poem. He has so many beautiful poems, but he says something like, the depth of your the depth of your wisdom is equal to the depth of your sorrow. Like what you've gone through, all the crap you've gone through is going to be how much better you're going to be off.
Yeah,
And
the
also,
whatever the suffering, right? It definitely brings out the light, I guess you could say. So we can't argue with that. But I would say that again, if you go back to the yogic wisdom, that's what we learn from life in general without wisdom. We come to those conclusions. Life, there is stories in the Vedas that talk about like whether or not you have access to that wisdom or not. The ocean's going to keep on churning you. It's going to keep on throwing you through the tapas whether you like it or not.
yeah,
It's up to you whether or not you want to avoid the suffering, basically.
it's true. Yeah, yeah. Every rug has to be beaten free of its dust.
Yeah.
And
The one thing I would like to say about this idea of, like the suffering that some children are born into is I believe it's become an excuse in some of the darker occult traditions that validates how they can abuse children sometimes.
hmm,
And I think that is something that is um, easy to use as like some sort of dark excuse for dark things to happen, but they don't need to when it involves validating suffering, right? And all these occult traditions that may or may not believe in this. I don't know who or what believes what, but the occult traditions that tend to do that tend to have a foundation in some sort of Vedic scripture or knowledge and are following that knowledge or something, right?
it's true.
And I just think it's not a true honoring of these scriptures to have that view, that anybody needs to suffer, and what these scriptures are, I believe, saying, like I talked about the story of Nachi Shastra and how to avoid creating demons and, how to avoid the unnecessary darkness essentially is to generate this bliss, generate this balance within, and then use the four remedies. And then, we can live in harmony and not have to go through this test and perhaps fail, perhaps allow civilization to fail again, right?
Well, it is interesting that, like, because yeah, I can see even in my girls, my two little girls. One is 1 year old and one is 6. But I can see in them that they have an inborn recognition of what is right and what is wrong.
Mm.
So it's amazing to me that even these people who are adults and then they read these occult things or they have these different ideas, and they're really abstract ideas that if you just take it to like they have a measure inside of them. Like my little girls, they have a measure inside of them. They can just tell what is right and what is wrong. When Amrita, who can't even speak very well, she's still speaking in the double syllables like mama, papa, tata, ya ya, no no, na na. Sometimes she can break out of it, but even for her, I can see when she does something wrong, she looks at me and she can tell that something is not right, something I didn't do something right, or this is not right, or that's not right.
Yeah, it's the inborn conscience is a naturally evolving thing. It's not just like ingrained in us. It's not something we're supposed to like get rid of, you know. And I think the best proof for that is to look at people who are naturally blissful. Because if you're happy, you know, if you're truly happy, you don't want to hurt anybody and you want to do good. You know, it's just human nature. That's what it means to be human, you know,
True.
is to have that. And a lot of these occult traditions are almost like trying to destroy the natural conscience that is part of being human, you know.
It's true. So friends, no matter what, you don't need to drink blood to live long. You don't need to do bizarre rituals to feel satisfaction. You don't need these things.
We're not talking to people about it. This is a discussion about,
I know.
you know, the ideas of,
I'm just having fun. I'm just
you
having
know,
fun.
but by the way, I think we should mention that the reason we're talking about this is because it's began to enter the mainstream,
It has,
and
yeah.
we need to have a good narrative about it,
It's
you
true.
know, because more and more people, like I see this on Facebook, people are talking about like blood drinking and, you know, Hollywood and stuff like that. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not, who knows ultimately, but we need to have a good narrative about it because it's going to influence people's minds and people's ideas about what is right and what is wrong and stuff like this, you know.
Yeah.
So that's why we're talking about it. We're not talking about it to demonize anybody,
No,
you
no.
know. We're talking about it to have a good conversation and, you know, just go the right direction with this stuff that people say is truth that is coming out, you know.
But it is also interesting that, like I was talking about this with Rasa, you know, Rasa, our good friend, and he
Yeah.
was saying, uh, and you can see this when you read Prabhupada, you know, the Hare Krishna Guru. You read
Yeah.
his stuff. He's talking about this kind of stuff, like these government people are like this, or like these leaders are like this, or there's these
Oh, yeah,
demons
yeah,
out.
Prabhupada, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Prabhupada's always talking about this, and then
Yeah.
these kind of things, understanding that the Rakshasas are real, and that the Asuras and the demons, it's not just a story. He's talking about people who are doing the wrong things. And no matter what, the stories also say that when we confront those demons, we transform them. And
Yeah.
even if they're confronted
Okay.
in one of those four offerings, like you said, if they're confronted through offerings, if they're confronted through coercion, if they're confronted through destruction,
Yeah.
they will be ultimately liberated from that when we confront them with one of those four ways.
Yeah. And again, to come back to these teachings too, there's steps towards that because it's, for instance, like look at your own life, right? How easy is it to be patient with like even just a child who is displaying a behavior that is not ideal, right? How easy is it to like stay in our bliss and our joy and bring that joy to the situation, bring the humor to the situation that, you know, just allows all the darkness to fall away, you know, just by having that humor and bringing it. So that's part of establishing that balance within us. This is, you know, I'll tell you a really interesting thing that I noticed, and this may or may not be true, but so in these four remedies, you know, there's the four names of them in Sanskrit. The first one is summon. That's the peaceful one, right? That's the first step. So summon, dana, right? Beda, and then danda.
Hmm.
So what's really interesting about these words is they're built on top of each other,
Yeah.
and summon is the odd one out, and I'll explain why. So we have dana, right? What would be kind of like breaking up dana into two and making it like the next step? Add a da at the end. So danda. So dana and danda, right?
Yeah.
So and in the same sense we have danda and beda. These are the two ones at the top.
Yeah.
So what would be if we were to break down Veda into the kind of the one syllable or two syllable version rather than the. You see where I'm going? The Veda has a da at the end, and the Danda has a da at the end, right?
Yeah. Right.
And if you take away the da, you get dana,
Yeah.
right? The danda, dana.
Yeah.
What happens when you take away the da at the end of the Veda? You get ba, basically,
Yeah.
right? And what's really interesting is this is related to the planets too,
Mm.
right? And the elements. And the element of water is saman, the element of earth is dana, right? The
Mm.
element of fire is beda, and the element of air is danda, and it fits into this. And what's really interesting is the saman, which is related to the water element, is related to the planet Venus, which is the water element. And one of the earliest known, according to some scholars that I've heard about, the earliest name for Venus is Ba. So here's the Ba and the Beda.
Mm-hmm.
And Venus, Sukra in Shukra in Sanskrit, right, is the origin of the word sugar, sweetness, right? So here's the sweetness. Here's the sweet words, right? It's the Ba. So originally the four remedies are Ba, Beda, or Ba, Dana, Beda, Danda in a certain sense. So why do they call Ba Saman? Because summon is all we need. Summon is everything being all balanced at once.
Yeah.
Right, is what I'm trying to get at, and just having this joyous establishing this inner balance within us, so that we can go out and be balanced, with people and not react, not jump to the danda or the beda right away. This is key to dealing with these things.
And that is the fundamental key to parenting as well, is to
Yeah,
keep your inner balance. Because if you don't have the inner balance, then you won't have patience with your children. You'll get
yeah,
angry at them. You'll lash out at them. You'll push them off. You'll hit them. Those
yeah,
things all happen in this world. And that's because the people don't have an inner balance. And that's the biggest struggle as a householder for myself, in the current state of the Vaishya, as a Grhasta, a householder, trying to uphold my duty as a father, is that if I don't have the time to do all my practices properly, it's very easy for me to lose my inner balance. So that's why it's important to engage yourself in the things you know you need to do. And for the parents who don't have time, like, live a more simpler life. Understand that you don't need to you don't need to go make a ton of money. Just go live in the countryside. Go get a cheaper rent. Go find an easier way to live your life. If you try to pull yourself between the materialism and then an inner balance, that struggle is going to put you off balance completely and totally. And I think that that's going to show itself more and more, especially in this quarantine time when a lot of people have lost their money and their livelihood. You're going to start to realize, like, when catastrophe comes, when there's a test, when there's trouble, this is nature's way of cleaning you of the things you don't need. And if you don't listen to that advice, because nature has a higher wisdom, there's a higher wisdom behind all of this. There's a plan behind all of this, whether you believe it or not. And if you just go with the flow and let it take you where the next step will be, you're going to turn out fine. But if you resist it and you fight it and you keep on trying to get back to where you were, you're never going to go forward to where you're going. So I think that's important to remember.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. The inner balance
Yeah,
is
these
everything.
tests that are happening and testing us whether or not we're balanced.
Right, and it's a test for society. We've been talking about how this is kind of a big loop, and it's eventually going to test if our civilization has the foundation necessary to be able to
Yeah,
flourish into what we know it can be. All of
yeah.
us know the whole reason we're participating in this whole world is because we know somewhere inside that this is going to lead to something that's ultimately going to be better.
Balance, it's Vishnu, but it's also balance means integrity. Balance means continuation. The string that vibrates and continues to vibrate rather than dies out, is constantly balanced. Is not too much dark, not too much light. It's just, you know, and so we need to do that. So save the world, everybody.
Save the world, save yourselves, save the day.
Exactly.
Save the day. Not just seize the day, but save the day. how can you make it a little bit better? How can you come back from where you were yesterday, even if you did bad yesterday, even if you did something really wrong yesterday? That was yesterday. Today you can come back and you can make it a little bit better, a little bit better. You don't need to achieve the massive status. You don't need to do something truly amazing. Just do something very small. That's something important. And I can take you so far. And then
Yeah.
the thirsty.
And never forget how awesome and amazing you are, because you have the potential to do all of this amazing stuff and find bliss in the smallest thing.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. I was going to say that the thirsty one, we always say that the thirsty one's sitting at a well and the water is so far below them. But if you throw one rock in at a time, eventually the water will come up to you. So it might take you a long time. Maybe you're very much in the pit of depression, but if you keep up, eventually you'll be nourished. So you have to, there's a little bit of faith that's involved. You need to have a bit of faith that eventually the water will get up to you. Yeah.
And remember, we're all in this together too. We're all poking our heads out of the lotus. We're all Brahma, and it's dark around us. So remember, hug a friend.
Friend. Yeah. Disrespect the social distancing. So hug a friend.
Precisely.
Hug a friend. Well, James, that was a good one today.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, it is fun, and we'll continue again. We'll be back again. This cafe is here. I'm always happy to have it.
Yeah. Until next time on the Esoteric Cafe.
Yang Ving Rong Yang